This show is brought to you in part by viewers like you who joined a Patreon or become YouTube members. Thank you. And if you could, hit the like button and subscribe if you want more Browns-focused content.
All right, the draft's not that far away, and I've done 4 in-depth breakdowns of quarterbacks in this draft class. I've done a lot of games of Shedeur Sanders. I broke down a ton of Cam Ward games. I broke down a ton of Will Howard games. I recently just broke down about 7 games over a 2-year period of Jalen Milroe. So with these 4 quarterbacks, I feel like I have done the work or done enough work to feel confident to give these guys comps. Now, I'm going to do this a little bit differently, right? Because I think if you just lazily give a comp out, that can backfire in so many different ways. And there's nothing simple about projecting a player's future in the NFL. I think a lot of people want it to be simple, but these are things that require a lot of nuance, a lot of conversation, a lot of reasoning to understand why you get to a certain point. And when you just say this player is that player, leaves a lot of room for interpretation and leaves a lot of room for people to misinterpret what you say. So I'm going to come out with comps for these 4 guys because I feel like I've watched them enough to have a educated enough opinion about them. I'm going to have 3 levels of comps, right? There's going to be a high-end comp for a player, a mid-tier comp for a player, a low-tier comp for a player, and then there's going to be a range that I think that player will fall between. And that's going to be heavily dependent on things that do or do not get confirmed in the pre-draft process, and also where that player goes and the situation that player ends up in specifically. So all of that being considered, let's jump into the quarterback comps. We're going to start with Jalen Milroe. Now, Browns fans who talk about wanting Jalen Milroe, or people who talk about if he's a fit for Stefanski's system or not, I think with Milroe, it takes more than a surface level viewing to understand why he's a fit for the Cleveland Browns and why the Browns might be very interested in Jalen Milroe, a lot more than I think people anticipate. One, there is a difference between the quarterbacks that Kevin Stefanski prefers as veterans and the quarterbacks that it seems that he prefers to develop. Right? When we look at the veteran quarterbacks that Kevin Stefanski has had success with, you point to Joe Flacco, you point to Kirk Cousins, right? Case Keenum. These guys have a very defined skill set. A lot of these dudes date back to that early West Coast offense era of the mid to late 2010s. And that is the comfort zone for Kevin when he's looking for a veteran quarterback. But if you've looked at the guys that the Browns and Kevin Stefanski have brought in to develop, their profile is a lot different, right? Deshaun Watson is not similar from a skill set aspect to what we see with Case Keenum, for example. Now, Jimmy has been vocal about the fact that he was the driving force to bring in Deshaun, so maybe Deshaun's not a great example. But Dorian Thompson-Robinson, with the 5th round pick, you would assume the coach would have some say in that. That was a developmental player that the Browns invested a couple of years in. His skill set very different than Case Keenum. You look at the rumors we heard about Joe Milton, that the Browns were interested in Joe Milton. We've heard rumors that the Browns were interested in guys like Justin Fields. We've heard that the Browns like these kind of players, right? Kellen Mond is another player they developed for like a year and a half. What I'm saying is that there might be a difference between what Stefanski prefers as a veteran quarterback and what Stefanski prefers to develop. And if you look at the guys that Stefanski has attempted to develop with late round picks or like free agent, not even undrafted free agency, but off waiver wires when you talk about Kellen Mond, the skill set is different. I think he wants a quarterback who can be a legitimate threat with their legs. If he's going to develop a guy, I think that is a key part of the list that he wants. It seems to be the one thing that Kevin always comes back to when you look at the younger quarterback prospects that the Browns have went after. Right? Guys who can scoot. What was he obsessed with DTR about? His scooting ability, right? He can run the ball. Whenever you see DTR come in the game, it was something to do with running the RPO. Like, Kevin wants to incorporate these things into the offense, but he has not found the players who can do that. Now, again, haven't spent a significant resource on finding that solution. So you expect that you would have no positive results at this point. But if you look at who he prefers to develop, the skill set is different from a Case Keenum, right? Which makes me think that Jalen Milroe seems to be the guy that they would want to develop. You look at Jalen Milroe, I see some of the stuff that Kevin likes from a passing perspective, right? Somebody who's willing to push the ball downfield, somebody who's willing to attack deep to intermediate, but also find their check down. That's all Jalen Milroe, someone who's willing to work on time. Is Jalen Milroe fantastic at working on time? No, but he wants to be on time, right? Which is more than can be said for other quarterbacks in this class. Jalen Milroe really poised in the pocket. I think that matters to Kevin as well. All of this stuff, Jalen Milroe fits, plus Tommy Reese is there, and who knows how Tommy Reese feels about Jalen Milroe, but if it's a positive summation of him, that has to help things as well. So that's why I think there's a strong chance that the Browns are much more interested in Jalen Milroe than I think some people are anticipating. Now, that doesn't mean Jalen Milroe becomes the second pick of the draft. I don't think that's a possibility. I'd be shocked if that happened. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Browns thought enough of Jalen Milroe to move up one spot to 32 to take him in the first round. That being said, what are the comps for Jalen Milroe? On the high end for Jalen Milroe, right, I think the absolutely highest he can reach, you have Colin Kaepernick. I see a lot of similarities between him and Colin Kaepernick as runners, as passers. The rawness that you saw in Colin Kaepernick's game as a passer, I think is similar to Jalen Milroe. When you watch Colin Kaepernick, the passing part of his game never felt natural. It always felt like he was learning to be a passer. The same is true with Jalen Milroe, right? When you watch him throw the ball, when you watch him try to pass, it does not feel natural, right? I know a lot of people go high-end Lamar Jackson, and that gets me started on another question, but he's not Lamar, right? The guy who was kind of like Lamar in college was Jaden Daniels, and that's because Jaden was a natural passer, the same way that Lamar Jackson was always a natural passer. He just wasn't a very refined passer at Louisville. But anyways, back to the comps, and I want to make this point clear. I think people are too high on Jalen Milroe's upside and way too low on his floor. I think Jalen Milroe has a higher floor than people realize, but less of a ceiling than some people think, right? Colin Kaepernick, I think, is right where he falls, right? We don't know how long Cap would have been able to stay in the league, right? That becomes this whole messy conversation that I don't have any interest in getting into. But what we do know with Cap is that we had 2 years of him at close to elite level play, but not necessarily elite level play. Colin Kaepernick was a one-speed thrower as a passer, right? He threw ropes all the time. Jalen Milroe is not exclusively a one-speed thrower, but he is primarily a one-speed thrower. Most of his balls are ropes, 70 miles per hour off the hand, fast balls that are coming to you. And that results in a lot of tip ball interceptions when you combine it with his inaccuracy, right? Cap had this ability to make some tight window throws, but miss layups. Jalen Milroe makes his tight window throws at times, and you go, oh my God, and then he misses layups. I think they're both similar in that respect. As runners, Jalen has more wiggle at the point of attack as a runner. Like, if you catch Jalen in the pocket, he can shake you, right? He could give you a nice little nasty move. I think he's a more natural runner than Colin Kaepernick was. Colin Kaepernick was straight line and go, right? Jalen can give you a little bit of wiggle, but Jalen also about getting to his top speed, right? With Lamar Jackson, it's like a RC car where it's start, stop, left, right, start, stop, left, right, and he wiggles his way through defenders. And that's why Lamar is dangerous as a runner. With Jalen Milroe, he's a very different type of runner than Lamar Jackson. I wouldn't even compare them as two similar things. Jalen Milroe is more about, okay, that hole's open, I'm sprinting through it, right? Colin Kaepernick style. RG3 ran a very similar way. I think he's a better runner than RG3. I think he is faster than Colin Kaepernick. Colin ran like a 4.5. He ran 4.4 flat, and I'm convinced he's faster on tape than that 4.4 flat says. And that's talking about a dude who ran a 4.4 flat, which is very, 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 very fast. That is what Jalen brings to the table. That's what his upside to me is. I see a lot of similarities between him and Colin Kaepernick, somebody you had to develop, right? Didn't start right away, but surprised you with how far that athletic ability could take you and how much he could accomplish even as a raw passer through the air. I think that's Jalen Milroe, right? If you give him the proper time to develop in the right system, there's a chance you get a very similar result to Colin Kaepernick that you get with Jalen Milroe. Now, Cap wasn't a 10-year franchise guy. I don't know if that's in the card for Jalen, right? My big worry with Jalen is how long would his peak last if he gets to it? You know, that's my big concern with him, and that's what I think you have to consider with Jalen Milroe. My mid-case scenario for Jalen Milroe is Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor, they're very different as runners, at least, right? Tyrod, more of the start-stoppy guy than, like, pure speed. And not the athlete and the size of a Jalen Milroe. I more or less look at this comp as like Jalen Milroe, Tyrod can be very similar as passers. Tyrod didn't throw 1,000 mile per hour ropes like Jalen Milroe can, but they both threw a pretty high arcing deep ball. I think their deep balls look very similar off the hand. If you watch Tyrod in Buffalo and you look at Jalen Milroe, you can see what I'm talking about there. Tyrod took a while to get going, right? It took him 4 years in Baltimore, and then he got the opportunity to start in Buffalo and became a Pro Bowler for a couple of years. Then he got traded to Cleveland and, became a career backup. I wouldn't be surprised if that's a career trajectory for Jalen. Maybe he has a couple of more years than Tyrod did at his peak because he gets to play earlier depending on what the situation is, but it could be very similar to that, right? And Tyrod Taylor at his peak was a Pro Bowl player, was a guy who got Buffalo to their first playoff game in a very long time, like not a scrub by any means, but just not somebody who had that long-lasting stay power in the NFL. Then we go to our worst case scenario for Jalen Milroe, or not worst, I don't want to say worst, that's too definitive, lowest scenario or comp for him. I think his floor is Justin Fields. You look at Justin Fields, he's primarily around because of his potential as a thrower and a runner, despite not putting together a 17-game body of work in his career that is worth a lot in NFL standards, right? That could be Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe is always going to be useful as an athlete the same way Justin Fields is always going to have use as an athlete. I think some people are way, way too low on the floor with Jalen Milroe for a guy who can run 4.39 and is the runner that he is, right? The floor is not that low with him. Like, you're going to find a way to use this dude on your roster. If you draft like Cam Ward and he's not good, he's useless on your roster. But if you draft Jalen Milroe and it turns out he's not able to get over his inaccuracy, he's still going to be useful to your roster because he can do something with the football because he's an incredible athlete with the ball in his hands. That's why I think his floor is probably like a way higher than a lot of people anticipate. I also think his ceiling is lower than a lot of people think, because I hear Lamar Jackson comps with him, and I just think, what did people watch with Lamar Jackson? Because he looks nothing like Lamar Jackson to me. Or even like the Anthony Richardson comps. I don't really see it with him because he's just such a better natural runner, and he's more progressive as a passer, in my opinion, than Anthony Richardson was coming out. Keep in mind, Anthony Richardson was like 19, 20 years old when he came out of college. I think Milroe fits that T, right? Even if he goes to a garbage situation like Justin Fields went to in Chicago, he's still going to be very useful as an athlete. He's still very coachable. He has the right intangibles to where he's not going to be a problem in your locker room. I think there's a chance that you could still get something productive out of him. So that's my 2 cents on Jalen Milroe. I think his floor is higher than people expect. I think his ceiling is lower than people expect. Where do I think he'll land? It really depends on situation with him. If he goes to a garbage situation, he will probably hit that Justin Fields floor with him where he would only be used as an athlete and the time might expire on you to develop him as a passer. But if he goes somewhere in the top 40 that's willing to truly commit to him and has the resources available to commit to him, I don't think it's crazy to see him hit the higher end of this comp market, right, where he's somewhere between Tyrod and Colin Kaepernick. I do think the Browns are a pretty good situation for him. I think Kevin Stefanski is a good coach for him. Tommy Reese is a good coach for him as well. I think that's a good situation for him. The only caveat is I've never seen this core of guys develop a guy. They've also never drafted a quarterback super high, so we'll see. But the work that was done under Stefanski, whether he wanted Deshaun here or not, with Deshaun is not very encouraging, right? The same could be said with what we've seen out of DTR. Not very encouraging there as well. So we don't really know what Kevin can do when it comes to developing a quarterback. Might be a big weakness of his, we find out. But if you give him if you give him Jalen Milroe, I think the pieces fit well enough that you could get the better result out of it. Because I don't think Kevin has to change much to understand why that dude would work for this system. So that's my thoughts on Jalen Milroe, my comp on him. Let's move on to the next guy, Cam Ward. This is the consensus number 1 quarterback in this draft class. Where he sits on people's big boards tends to vary, but most people put Cam Ward as QB1. I am not in that group of most people. I do not think Cam Ward is QB1 of this class. I think that the best quarterback prospect, and keep in mind I'm saying prospect in this class, is Shedeur. I think Cam Ward is behind Shedeur in that respect. My high-end comp for Cam Ward is Baker Mayfield. My mid-tier comp for him is Jay Cutler. And my low-end comp for him is Zach Wilson. The reason I think his high end is Baker Mayfield is you see the same things that allow Baker Mayfield to strive. You see some of those things with Cam Ward. Now, the on-field demeanors could not be any different. Baker Mayfield very much in the camp of people who will let you know how they feel. Cam Ward in the camp of nonchalantness. Right? Like one tries really hard. The other one feels like he don't try at all. But both hard workers and both willing to put in the work. But yeah, Cam Ward, Baker Mayfield, strong arms, ability to make all the throws, even off weird angles, which Baker has proven to be able to do, especially in Tampa Bay. And same thing with Cam Ward. I think the similarities in the negatives with Baker Mayfield are similar with Cam Ward, right? Inaccuracy. We all have watched Baker Mayfield enough to know that he can go on spurts of inaccuracy. He can be a very streaky quarterback. Risky with the football, even though Baker has played much better in Tampa Bay. The interceptions are still there with Baker Mayfield. And I think interceptions are going to follow Cam Ward no matter where he plays in the NFL. His decision-making in college, despite playing 5 years as a starter in college football, is simply just too erratic for me to ignore and act like it's just going to go away because he goes into the NFL. I think he's going to always throw a lot of interceptions. I think he's going to have these streaks where he looks really good. He's going to have streaks where he looks really bad. He's in that camp of quarterbacks where you say everything you say about them is true. Everything negative you can say about Baker Mayfield is true. Everything positive you can say about Baker Mayfield is true, right? Because he can be both of those guys, sometimes in the same game, but sometimes in the same month, right? Cam Ward, same thing, right? Cam Ward's going to have the capability to look amazing for a couple of weeks, and everybody's shitting on me and dunking on me about it. And then like 4 weeks later, Cam Ward looks terrible, and they're expecting me to shit on people and dunk on people about Cam Ward. It's going to be both with Cam Ward more than likely. I think he's going to give you a little bit of this, a little bit of that in the NFL. My big concern with Cam Ward is Baker is a better game manager than Cam Ward in college and in the pros, obviously. And Baker's not a great game manager. He's made strides as a game manager, but he's never been a great one. Cam Ward is a significantly bad game manager in my eyes. Like, he makes horrific decisions in big time moments that he really just shouldn't be making at this point with the level of experience that he has, right? That's why I think Jay Cutler makes a ton of sense for him. Jay Cutler, for those of you who weren't around for when Jay Cutler was a, fixture at starting quarterback for either the Denver Broncos or the Chicago Bears, let me give you a brief synopsis on Jay Cutler. Jay Cutler was a quarterback that was capable of putting up big numbers, that was capable of putting up highlights. But the issue with Jay Cutler was the consistency, the decision-making, and there was also he was very nonchalant in the same ways that Cam Ward is nonchalant. There's that famous meme of Jay Cutler literally not giving a damn on the sideline when he's doing a trick play. That's kind of what Jay Cutler's like, right? But Jay was somebody who could get you the yards and touchdowns you would expect from a quarterback, but was always going to throw interceptions. He's going to be prone to untimely turnovers, and he's going to be very streaky. So he was a quarterback who was good enough to be your starter for a while, but you had questions about how far you can go with this dude, right? In the same way that Baker Mayfield is a better version of Jay Cutler, where you think Baker can put up a stretch of 4 games where you can argue that he gets the MVP. The problem with Baker is that 4-game stretch, you don't know if that's going to happen in the playoffs or if you're going to get the bad Baker 4-game stretch in the playoffs, right? He's hard to count on for long periods of time because of that inconsistency, right? Jay Cutler was even more of that. Plus, he visibly gave off this aura of not caring. So that's why I think Jay Cutler lands. I mean, not Jay Cutler. That's why I think Jay Cutler and Cam Ward have similarities. Turnover prone, can make some incredible throws. You look at a Jay Cutler highlight tape or a Brandon Marshall highlight tape, it looks incredible with Jay Cutler. But you watch those games and you go, what the hell is Jay Cutler doing right here, right? There's a lot of that there. That's what I feel when I watch Cam Ward on tape. Is it feel like Jay Cutler a little bit, right? The low end of Cam Ward's comp is Zach Wilson. I think this is obvious. Very similar players. I think the one caveat is Zach Wilson was 20 or 21 when he came out of BYU versus Cam Ward, who's going to be 22 but 23 before he starts his first game in the NFL. So significantly more experience for Cam Ward, and that's what concerns me. The age and experience he has with the decision-making that he has demonstrated, it's just not great, right? The inability to be on time, play in structure, these are things that greatly concern me about Cam Ward. If you're asking me where his range is, I'm going to say somewhere between Zach Wilson and Jay Cutler. I think that's where he ends up. I'm not a big fan of Cam. I've made no ifs about this. I've went to watch Cam play against Georgia Tech. I've watched all 22 on him. I feel confident in saying I think that's where Cam Ward sits. There's a chance that if he goes to the right situation, a coach is willing to let him be him, that he can hit that Baker Mayfield ceiling. I've heard other people say he could be Deshaun right before he got to Cleveland, and I think there's something there to that, right? But he has to go somewhere that embraces all that he is in order to do that. I don't know if that place is Cleveland. Maybe that place ends up being Tennessee. But for me, I think from what I see, what I'm projecting him to do in Cleveland system, it would probably be somewhere between Zach Wilson and Jay Cutler. Let's go on to Will Howard. Will Howard is a fun one for me to watch because, he makes good decisions most of the time. The big question with Will is arm strength, right? And I think that's going to come up with his comps. So high end, I think the best Will Howard could possibly be is Kirk Cousins. right? If everything goes right and Will Howard's arm is able to get a little bit stronger than we think it is right now, he could be Kirk Cousins. Smart decision maker, good point guard, right? That feels like Kirk Cousins. Not going to make spectacular plays. You're not going to win a Super Bowl because you got Will Howard. But, Will Howard, it can be good enough to make a lot of money in the NFL if his arm's just a little bit stronger. So that's his high end. Mid-range, Andy Dalton, right? Andy Dalton was a quarterback who kind of lived off of his ability to be accurate, but didn't have much arm talent, right? Now, Andy Dalton did have more arm talent, I think, in college, or displayed more than Will Howard did. So it's going to be work for Will Howard to get to the Andy Dalton level. So he still has to demonstrate that he has a stronger arm than what he does right now. But Andy Dalton makes sense for him. I think he could be a really good regular season quarterback, somebody who you can win games with and get to the playoffs with. But anything after that, I don't know. That Will Howard demonstrated a lot during the college football playoff, but also Ohio State had a lot around him. And while he did not nerf those guys, I think, there's something to, are you going to have Jeremiah Smith for him to bail him out on some of his far field throws? Are you going to have a Emeka Buka to extend and get these big explosive plays out these short throws? You got to have the right pieces around him in the same way that Cincinnati consistently surrounded Andy Dalton with the right pieces. And if you look at Andy Dalton once A.J. Green started to age, it looked very different. But yeah, I think Andy Dalton makes a ton of sense for the mid-case scenario with Will Howard. My low-case scenario, career backup, Case Keenum, Colt McCoy. If his arm strength is what it is right now, I feel like he could be Case Keenum, somebody who come in, start if you need him to start, but also, can come in relief duty, smart enough guy, good enough processor to keep the offense afloat. That's why I think of Will. It's really all dependent on how much more he can take his arm strength than what it is right now. If he can improve it, I think he can get close to that Andy Dalton range. If he can greatly improve it, then we're talking about Kirk Cousins with him. But if he can't improve it, then we're probably talking about a career backup, which, depending on where he goes, would be worth a pick if you're able to take him. I don't know. Drafting a career backup is kind of like drafting a kicker to me, where you're going to be the team that cuts him and then somebody else benefits from it. Like, you want to sign a kicker. You don't really want to draft a kicker. That's the same way I feel about career backup quarterbacks. So, that could be the danger. If you don't feel like the arm strength is there for him to be Andy Dalton, Kirk Cousins, then I wouldn't advise drafting him super high. But if you do think that he could develop that arm strength, then, go for it. See if you can get that guy. Because I think the processing and his ability to be on time and all of that can work out for a lot of different teams. Let's talk about the last guy I've been able to look at, Shedeur Sanders. The high end for Shedeur is Tua Tagovailoa. Right? Right-handed Tua, somebody who is very accurate. Tua sometimes is accurate, but somebody who could be a very accurate passer, somebody who can move a little bit more than you would anticipate, little bit undersized, but works well with his size at the position. And, able to carve out a good career. You're going to need better players around him, similar to what Tua needs in order to get far with Shedeur. But yeah, I think that there's a possibility of him hitting that high end there. His mid-range to me is Teddy Bridgewater. Before the injury, Teddy Bridgewater. Let me make that clear, right? I'm not talking about the career backup Teddy, but the guy who could have likely been a starter for Minnesota for at least 5 years down there before the ACL injury. I think that is his mid-case scenario. There's a lot of similarities in their build. I think Teddy was a more talented prospect coming out of college than Shedeur was, and a more battle-tested prospect coming out of college than Shedeur was. Teddy had beaten a top 5 team in Florida in college. Shedeur has never done that, right? I think Shedeur's performance versus ranked teams is very suspect and worrisome when you try to project him playing against NFL defensive lines and his ability to escape there. We'll see. He's running his pro day today, so he might surprise us all and run like a really good 40. But there's that concern there with him, right? Is he the athlete that he needs to be to play the way that he plays at the next level? And then my low end comp for him is Mac Jones, right? Mac Jones came into the league really accurate his first year, surprised a lot of people, and had a good year. I think he even made the Pro Bowl his first year in the NFL, or one of his first few years in the NFL. It petered out pretty quickly for Mac Jones, which is my concern with Shedeur, right? Like, how far can he take what he has physically in the NFL, which is not much. He's not the most physically talented guy that we've seen. A lot of it is just straight up skill. And I think that's why guys like Tom Brady really like him, because he's going a really long way without having a lot of natural gifts. So, yeah, Mac Jones makes a lot of sense. It's also the only other quarterback I can think of that was a supporting player to somebody who got the Heisman the same year. They put up some good numbers, right? Mac Jones was in the Heisman votes, while it was Devonta Smith who won it. And then also this year, Travis Hunter, Shedeur Sanders, a supporting character in that Heisman trip as well. I think he's going to fall into the Teddy Bridgewater pre-injury category, possibly get to Tua, depending on what situation he ends up in. So I have him in the upper half of that comp, which is why I have him as QB1, because I think of all of these four guys, the likelihood that you get a starter is most likely with Shedeur. Is the upside as high as somebody like Cam, who I have comp to Baker Mayfield, who I think is better than Tua, or not Colin Kaepernick, but Jalen Milroe, who I have comp to Colin Kaepernick, who I would say is better than Tua? No. But I think the possibility of this dude being good is much higher. Now, the thing with Shedeur is, I don't know what that first year is going to look like, right? There's a chance that this looks like Bryce Young, where he has to adjust to not being a good athlete, where he has to adjust to being a little undersized at the quarterback position, and that takes a while for him to get used to, right? Like, I think there's a chance that of all these guys, this is the dude who struggles the most in the first year. If you're asking me who I think would be good in their first year, or most likely be good, I wouldn't be surprised if it was Jalen Milroe, but I also think Cam Ward has a chance to do that, because when you are an improviser, that first year is usually the year you hit the hardest, and then people kind of catch up with your traits. So Cam Ward, Jalen Milroe will probably be the guys who hit the ground running a little bit faster than Shedeur. At least that's my concern with Shedeur, is that a lot of this is going to take him having to catch up to getting to that next level physically. And if you watched him, it took a while for him, once he went from high school to college at Jackson State, for him to play up to the level where he was a really good quarterback at the FCS level, at least with Jackson State. And then his transition from Jackson State to the Power 4 with Colorado, he had the adjustment year in the Pac-12, then caught up fine in the Big 12. He might have a similar thing in his jump to the NFL, where he needs an adjustment year to get used to how things are going. And once he gets used to that, he could dial in and look more like the guy he was in college in the NFL. So if Shedeur, I'd say this here, if Shedeur has a garbage rookie year, I think you got to give that another year. And that's the same with any of these guys, right? Even Cam Ward, who I'm not a big fan of. I don't think anybody should rush to a conclusion after 1 year or less than like 20 games started for any of these quarterbacks. And even 20 games is not enough to really judge a quarterback by. You got to give this stuff time. I know we're used to guys like CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels hitting the ground running, but it ain't usually like that, right? Drafting a quarterback has never been considered a win-now decision unless that guy is Andrew Luck and everybody knows what that's going to be. But for the most part, drafting a quarterback is seen as a long-term decision, so you got to think about it in long-term terms. I'm seeing too many people think that getting a quarterback is a fast pass to get on the fast lane to building your NFL team. The drafting a quarterback is developing. It's shutting down the highway and building down a new one. It's going to slow things down for a while, more than likely. So, yeah, give these guys time. These are my comps for these guys. We'll see what they end up being in the NFL. But this is what I feel about these guys after doing the work on them. If you disagree, that's fine, right? You know, nobody has the right opinion yet. We're just kind of speculating based on what we have out here about these quarterbacks. So, you know, these aren't facts. These are just how I feel about these players based on the work that I've done. Let me know what you feel about these players in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.